Schaefer, we were having this conversation earlier about maximizing a roster versus taking a risk reward on somebody that you're not sure on yet. You're kind of in that spot with JJ McCarthy versus bringing in another bridge guy or signing Sam Darnold. Nebraska's kind of been in that spot with certain positions over the last year or so. Like, where do you land on that if you're thinking, hey, I can get to this level? For Nebraska, I think it was, hey, I can get to a bowl game.
And this is on the heels of his great that segment last week, Shafe. There was a lot in there.
Yeah, like you can say, hey, I can get to a bowl game playing some of the older guys. I'm going to ride with the guys I know versus, hey, maybe we could have got to 8 wins had we played some of the younger guys, but we also maybe could have missed the bowl game. Like, how do you start to weigh that, whether it's with the Vikings or whether it's Nebraska, that you start to go, hey, at some point I have to go for the big reward rather than minimize the risk?
I think you have to have a really strong understanding of what your foundation is, and like with the Minnesota Vikings, their foundation is their offense. It's Justin Jefferson and it's that passing game. So if you went out and you got a dink and dunk quarterback that can't put the ball 15 yards downfield with any accuracy, you'd be wasting, what you have. So you have to figure out your foundation. What do we think Nebraska's foundation is on this roster right now? Because we can't say it's the passing game because we really don't know what any of these wide receivers that you've swapped in are at this point in time. We thought it was a passing game coming into the season, and that disappeared when the schedule got a little bit tougher and you got into Big Ten play. Do we know what Nebraska's foundation is? Sorry.
Did you say quarterback?
I think quarterback's a big part of it.
Yeah, you're going to have to make it something, right? So I think it's whatever the designation is. And I think they're gonna say quarterback.
Well, and I think that's probably the right idea because you've identified that as maybe your most talented player or the player that is most important to getting you to where you want to go. So I think that makes sense. And so what have they done this offseason? They went out and they changed out wide receivers. It seemed very apparent to me that Dana Holgorsen was not happy enough with his wide receiver room that he has inherited. And he went out and he got a wide receivers coach that he trusts. And they went and they got wide receivers that they think can help in this offense in the immediacy. And even a guy like Hardley Gilmore, the fourth, isn't just hey, we're going to go grab someone to have for a couple years and see what he can do. I think this was a really important get for them because it again, they want to build up that wide receiver room from where they're at. If they're a team that's going to rely on Dylan Raiola's arm, he has to have people to be able to throw the ball to. And so I think that's really important defensively. If the foundation, and I think with Matt Rhule, it always starts up front with your defensive line, and then how do you build off of that? Well, they've added behind some of their starters or presumed starters on their defensive line. They added some more bodies, and then they've kind of found different plug and play players defensively with what they brought in. I mean, we don't know 100% who is going to start at corner or who's going to start at safety at this point in time, but they've given themselves a lot of options, which I think is sort of important. But a lot of it is you have to figure out what your foundation is, and then you have to kind of decide, like, is this enough? Can we, what type of team are we here? Are we going to have to grind out to get the 6 wins? I don't think they felt like they had that team last year. I think they felt like they had a team that could win 9 or 10 games. And they did.
On the heels of last week, and still along these lines, I can't remember the exact term used. It was either stunting or stymieing the growth, right? Because as a developmental program, there still has to be that piece when you compliment guys. And we talked about how careful Nebraska was being with guys that they brought in that are still kind of developmental guys. Where is if you're going to put in another important puzzle piece, where is the day-to-day competition slice of that pie that you're trying to put together for this developmental chart? Like, how important is the day-to-day competitiveness for you if you're still not wanting to, stunt growth? I think you said stunt growth.
Well, I think it's huge. I think part of why you go get a Gabe Moore and, the kid from East Tennessee who's Jalen George. I think it's Jalen George. There's so many new names. Like it's you You kind of have to, off of memory, it's kind of hard to recall everything. But you go get those two guys because what are they going to do? They're competing with Keona Davis. They're competing with Cam Lenhart. They're competing with Elijah Judy. They're competing with Williams Winery. Like all of those guys are competing for a couple spots on either side of Riley Van Poppel or whoever's going to be in the middle of that defensive line. Like if you're building up your roster, you need competition for Keona Davis. Like Keona Davis had a really nice freshman year and that he got his feet wet and he got to play. You can't just be like, all right, now the job's yours, kid. And there's nobody that's going to be pushing them or you have no fail safe. So I think daily competition is huge. I think we're seeing that with a lot of what they brought in terms of guys that maybe have more years of playing. Justin Rhett was brought in to compete in the defensive back room. Andrew Marshall and Amir Khan are brought in to compete with your cornerback spot, whether that's Donovan Jones competing with those guys, Bly Hill, if Mario Buford is or Marquise Buford are moving back to safety. So I think what they've done specifically on defense more than on offense is they have that daily competition that Damon was talking about. They brought in a bunch of guys that all have the ability to play and they want to see if the cream can rise. Like, I think that's sort of where we're at, right? Like otherwise, I don't think they brought in a bunch of people that are unquestioned starters on the defensive side of the ball. I think they brought in people to compete with players they already like that are younger, that maybe don't have a ton of experience, that you can't just hand the job to, but need to sort of earn it as well. Like that's what I've seen on the defensive side. Maybe I'm just completely missing whatever it is that they're doing. But to me, they're really reinforcing this idea that you earn your job through practice. You earn your job through repetition. You earn your spot on the field on game day by beating out the people around you. And if you don't succeed in game, there's someone that's going to be there to take it because the competition is going to be strong, week in and week out.
We're talking with Mike Schaefer, Husker247. Schaefer, how much of that do you think has to do with the fact that they are losing some kind of more proven guys, whether it's up front with Nash and Ty or in the back end with guys like Gifford, where you kind of thought going in, okay, this guy is sort of an unquestioned starter, versus the kind of makeover of the defensive staff and maybe them wanting different things than the previous defensive coaches did?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point here because you've had so many different defensive backs coaches in a short amount of time. I mean, you think about that position room, you went from Travis Fisher to Evan Cooper to John Butler to Addison Williams. They all have different opinions on the type of players that they want, different body types that they're interested in, different views on the type of guys that are better at cross training from safety to corner to safety, different, opinions on what a Malcolm Hartzog is for an Addison Williams is completely different than what he was for a Travis Fisher, is different than how John Butler saw him, is different than how Evan Cooper saw him. So when you have that many different people, I see this a lot, like, oh, Nebraska has like 28 defensive backs. Well, yeah, because you've had a lot of different cooks in the kitchen and they all want their different ingredients and they all have a different recipe that they're trying to make. And so some of it is you have to figure out what it is that works best in your defense, who's going to fit there. Some of these guys are going to compete and leave in the spring because they're going to get passed up or the opportunity isn't going to be there. And I think that is most represented by the defensive back room, maybe more than anything else. Like I don't know that a whole lot changed with Terrence Knighton to Terry Braden, in part because we haven't heard him talk and he hasn't been as involved in terms of the player procurement. But I think a lot has changed in what you've been doing on your defensive backfield.
It's interesting. I have to have Chiefs fans. You're certainly not saying that the Nebraska fans, man, lose so we can get coach in town. But, man, you're thinking, hey, man, anytime you get
I
ready.
have a question for you guys because you're both veterans of this whole process. You have thoughts on these sort of things. Does it strike you as weird that Nebraska doesn't feel like they have a completed coaching staff during one of the most critical time periods to get on the road and show your face to different programs around the country? Like you have that picture the other day of Matt Rhule with those coaches in St. Louis, and we already know your offensive coordinator isn't going to go on the road and recruit. You've hired Phil Snow, who probably isn't going to go on the road and recruit. Jamar Mosey and Keith Williams are stepping into these roles for you, but it feels so odd. Like, as someone who has covered recruiting, closely since getting hired in October of 2011, this is such a different style, and I don't know that it's right, wrong, better, worse, but it is weird that you sort of don't have a final staff, and it's January 14th.
I think because
we're still waiting on a special teams coach.
I'm in agreement. I think what it is, Schaefer, is very strategic about assigned specific roles kind of behind the scenes, right? Yeah. So there are guys that have like kind of changed their roles a little bit, whether it's a Troy Vincent Jr. or you mentioned Keith Williams or Mosey or some of these guys that are kind of operating behind the scene. And it's funny because we're describing the term bridge, like, do you get a bridge quarterback until you get I think Nebraska is playing to their staff's strengths until they get what they want completed. And I also think because they're pretty much, 2025 is pretty much done, they're afforded a little bit of time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, I do. It's just, it's one of those where
it's weird.
And I might be wrong. I could be wrong. And this is just based off of conversations with coaches in the past. The January period always has a ton of value for kicking things forward because you're making the introduction in a lot of ways to a lot of players that you offer during their sophomore or junior seasons that you've never met in person before. And sometimes, and just, talking with some of these guys, and Marcus Satterfield has been out a lot in the last week or so. These tight ends know nothing about Nebraska, but Marcus Satterfield is their first link into it. And so make whatever jokes you want about that, but that's a really important thing to put a picture of someone on Nebraska, because damn well that if you're recruiting against Clemson, Michigan State, there is a coach that is their visual identification of that university. And when you don't have that, or when that coach isn't really going to be your coach or whatever it is harder to identify Nebraska as a real option. And so I think it matters when you're able to get on the road to get in front of as many critical players as you want to, because just spamming their DMs and their text every day doesn't create the perception of an individual or an image of what the University of Nebraska is. And the first battle that this program goes through every single time is getting someone to campus. It's really hard to get someone to campus if all you're doing is sending DMs and text messages.
Schaefer, let me get you out of here on this because we only have about 60 seconds. How far are you into Landman, and have you where are we before I say anything? How many episodes have you seen?
The last episode featured Jerry Jones giving a very passionate, well-written speech about the value of working with family. So I think we're through 9 episodes. And I think there's 10. So maybe there's one. Is there more than 10? I don't know.
Nope. 10 is it. And
okay. So we got one more.
Spectacular.
Shelby needs to work a lot less so we can watch it.
Where are you ranking this in your the pantheon of like Bosch and some of these other gyms that you figured out in the first season?
I like it. I'm a little worried it's going to go full Sons of Anarchy and completely off the rails, because that's sort of the Taylor Sheridan experience. But I mean, Billy Bob Thornton's incredible. So I'm in. I'm in for that alone.
The guy makes typecasting work.
Billy Bob?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was born for these
Billy
lines.
Bob.
Like, the dialogue is incredible. He delivers it perfectly. He's incredibly sardonic, sarcastic, unhappy. It's a kinship. I feel a real kinship with that.
Schaefer, who's your favorite character, real quick?
On the show, it's probably just Billy Bob at this point. I don't know that there's. His Allie Larder's nuts. That's fun.
Oh, she's certifiable, isn't she?
Yeah. That's guy Mike Schaefer, Husker247. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Schaefer.